It started with a simple purchase, an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. But some places don't forget the people who once lived, or the ones who never left. When I first heard my name whispered through the static, I thought it was just interference. Now I know, something in there was listening, and it still is. Greetings, every shadow hides a story. Welcome. Under the bed. It happened 3 years ago, in the small industrial town of Clarksville, just off the old highway that no one really uses anymore. My name is Jack Morris, I'm 30 years old, and at the time I was just trying to get my life back together. After my father passed, I used the small inheritance he left me to buy something cheap, a place where I could start my repair business. What I found was a massive, forgotten warehouse at the very edge of town. The listing said it had been empty for decades. The price was unbelievably low, too low, but the agent told me the owner just wanted to get rid of it. It looked like a metal giant asleep, rusted doors, broken windows, graffiti on one wall that the rain had nearly washed away. The air smelled like dust and iron. When I went to see it, an old security guard from the nearby factory stood outside the fence. He stared at me for a long time before speaking. "You don't want that place, son," he said, his voice dry and calm. "It belonged to a man who used to talk to spirits. Said they were the real owners of the building." Then he gave a small, bitter smile. "Maybe they still are." I laughed it off, but the way his eyes didn't leave mine made me uneasy. Still, I signed the papers. I wanted to believe I'd found a bargain, not a curse. The first evening I came back with a flashlight and gloves to start cleaning. The sun was setting, painting the broken windows orange. The echo of my footsteps bounced through the metal walls like something alive. Every sound was sharper there, the crunch of glass, the squeal of the rusty door, the hum of wind slipping through the cracks. The warehouse was huge inside. Empty shelves, torn insulation hanging like cobwebs, and old tools scattered around. Near the back, there was a small office built into the corner, wooden door, fogged glass, and a faint smell of mold. The handle was cold when I touched it. Inside the office, everything was coated in a thick layer of dust. Papers lay all over the floor. A cracked photo frame showed a middle-aged man standing next to a large radio set, smiling. On the desk was an old metal sign with his name etched into it, Morris Grayson. The same name I'd seen on the deed. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, soft, almost behind me. I froze. It sounded like someone saying my name. "Jack." The air moved slightly, like someone breathing too close. I spun around. The room was empty. I told myself it was the wind, that the cracks in the walls made strange noises, but then the overhead light flickered. Once. Twice. Then steadied. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. I packed up and left. Outside, the street lights along the road flickered too, as if following me. When I looked back, I thought I saw a figure standing by the office window, not moving, just watching. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that whisper in my head. My name, drawn out and breathless. Jack. I tried to convince myself it was just nerves. Just the loneliness of being in that empty place. But deep down I knew something wasn't right. The next morning, I went back to take pictures in daylight. Everything looked normal, too normal. The office window was broken, but the inside looked untouched. I checked the light fixture that had flickered, it wasn't even connected to power. The wires were cut. That's when a chill ran through me, sharp and cold, like someone dragging an icy hand down my spine. Because if there was no power, then what made the light flicker? I stepped outside, took one last look at the warehouse, and noticed something I hadn't before. On the side wall, written in faded black paint, were the words, "Don't listen when they call your name." I stared at it for a long time, trying to tell myself it was just an old prank, graffiti from kids. But I knew that message wasn't for them. It was for me. And that night, when I finally tried to sleep again, the whisper came back, closer this time, like it was right behind the wall of my bedroom. "Jack." 2 nights after the first visit, I went back to the warehouse. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that the whisper I'd heard was nothing more than my imagination echoing through an empty space. Still, as I parked the truck by the fence, I kept the headlights on a little longer than usual, just to see the building lit up. In the beam of light, the warehouse looked almost alive, like something breathing slowly in the dark. The air was cold that night, colder than it should have been for late September. When I pushed open the front doors, the same sharp metallic scent hit me again: rust, dust, and something faintly sweet, like burned oil. My footsteps echoed as before, but the echoes now felt wrong. Delayed. Off rhythm. As if the building waited a second too long before answering me back. I tried to ignore it and focused on cleaning. I swept the floor, gathered old boxes, and stacked them by the entrance. In one of the boxes, I found a notebook wrapped in a yellowed cloth. The cover was cracked leather, the pages brittle, filled with handwritten notes. The name on the first page matched the one from the sign I'd found: Morris Grayson. Most of it was gibberish. Strange symbols, numbers, and short phrases written over and over. But some lines were clear. Spirits respond best through vibration. They speak through static. Once you tune in, they never stop. The handwriting changed halfway through, as if someone else had taken over. The words became frantic, uneven. They're inside the walls now. They whisper when the lights go out. I closed the notebook and looked around. The office seemed smaller than before, tighter. I could swear the air felt heavier. Then, from the corner of the room, I heard a faint hum, a low electrical buzz. It came from an old radio on the shelf, the same one from the photograph I'd seen earlier. The dial was cracked, the cord unplugged. Yet the static was clear. I reached out and touched the dial. The hum stopped instantly, like someone had cut a wire. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then the radio hissed again, louder this time, and in the noise, a voice formed. A man's voice, slow, deep, uncertain. "Can you hear us, Jack?" I froze. My hand was still on the dial. The voice repeated, a little clearer now. "Jack, can you hear us?" I stumbled backward, knocking the chair over. My flashlight flickered and went out completely. The warehouse plunged into darkness. I could still hear the radio whispering through the open door, not just one voice anymore, but several, overlapping, like a dozen people speaking at once. I grabbed my phone and turned on its light. The radio was still unplugged. No power anywhere in the room. Yet the voices kept going. I unplugged everything I could find, even pulled the old fuse from the breaker box, but nothing changed. Finally, I slammed the notebook shut and ran outside. The cold air hit me hard. I sat in the truck, breathing fast, my hands shaking. After a minute, I dared to look back. The warehouse stood silent, dark, perfectly still. No light, no sound, nothing moving. I drove home, convinced I'd never go back. But that night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd heard. There was something familiar about the voice that said my name, like I'd heard it before, maybe on an old tape, or a dream I'd forgotten. The next morning, I called the real estate agent and asked if anyone had ever complained about strange noises coming from the property. He hesitated before answering. "Not noises, exactly," he said. "But the man who owned it before you, people said he used to record things. They said he believed the walls could capture voices. Like echoes that never fade." That evening I returned again, this time during daylight. I needed to prove to myself that what I'd heard had some logical explanation: old wiring, radio interference, anything. The air inside was warmer than before, but the smell had changed. It was sharper, almost chemical. I walked to the office. The notebook was where I'd left it. But the radio wasn't. It sat on the desk now, facing the doorway. The dial glowed faintly red, even though the plug still dangled loose from the socket. A voice rose from the static, not a whisper, but a steady tone, deep and calm. "Don't leave us again, Jack." The light flickered above me. The hum in the walls grew louder, pulsing like a heartbeat. I stumbled back toward the door, but when I reached for the handle, it wouldn't move. The metal was hot, burning my palm. I yelled, slammed my shoulder against it, and finally forced it open. The hum stopped the instant I stepped outside. Everything was quiet again. When I looked down at my hand, there was a faint burn mark across my palm, in the shape of a circle, the same pattern I'd seen scribbled over and over in Morris Grayson's notebook. That night, as I sat in the dark of my apartment, I turned on the TV just for noise. But between channels, through the static, I heard it again, my name, quiet, almost gentle. "Jack, can you hear us?" I turned off the TV. The sound didn't stop. It was coming from inside the walls. I hadn't slept for more than an hour that night. Every sound in my apartment made me tense, the hum of the refrigerator, the pipes creaking in the walls, even the clock ticking felt like a whisper trying to form words. By morning, I couldn't tell if the voices I'd heard were real or just the echo of my own thoughts. But I needed answers. I drove back to the warehouse. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt, as if the road itself didn't want me to return. The building looked worse in daylight, paint peeling, the roof sagging, and a dead crow lying by the door, as if something inside had drained its life. I tried to laugh it off, but my voice didn't sound like mine anymore. Inside, everything was just as I'd left it, except for one thing. The notebook on the desk was open again, to a page I didn't remember reading before. The handwriting was small, shaking, and the words blurred where the ink had run. They're not voices. They're memories. The building remembers the dead. For a second, I stood there, feeling the cold air press against my back. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, dragging, from the hallway outside the office. I turned, expecting to see someone, maybe a squatter, maybe the old guard. The hallway was empty, yet the sound kept moving closer. "Hello?" My voice echoed too loudly. The steps stopped. Then, softly, a reply came from the shadows. "You shouldn't have touched the radio." My throat went dry. The voice wasn't angry, it sounded tired, almost sad. I stepped closer to the hallway, shining my flashlight. Dust floated through the beam like thin smoke. No one there. That's when I saw something at the end of the hall, a reflection in a cracked mirror. A man standing still, wearing a dark coat, face pale and blurred by the glass. He wasn't moving, just watching me. I blinked, and he was gone. I found a small metal plaque near the office door, half buried under debris. It had a name engraved on it, Morris Grayson, Warehouse Supervisor, 1972 to 1986. My stomach turned. I realized I had been seeing his name everywhere, the deed, the notebook, the sign, the photo. The man who spoke to spirits. Later that afternoon, I went to the local records office. The clerk, an old woman with silver hair, looked uneasy when I mentioned the address. "That place," she said quietly, "was closed after an accident. Grayson died inside. They said he was electrocuted, but the report didn't make sense. There was no power in the building at the time." I asked if anyone else had ever owned it after him. She shook her head. No one kept it long. Some said they heard him talking on the radio. Others claimed he never left. When I came back to the warehouse that evening, the sun was already setting. The air inside felt thick and warm, like a breath trapped for years. I stood in the office doorway, and the radio turned on by itself. No sound at first, just a low hum, then a voice, calm, deep, the same one from before. "Jack, you came back." My flashlight began to flicker, the beam stretching across the wall where the mirror hung. And for a moment, I saw him again, standing behind me. His reflection was clear this time. A middle-aged man with hollow eyes, hands resting on the radio's edge, smiling faintly. I turned, but the space was empty. Only the hum remained. Then the voice said something new. I wanted to speak with her again. They promised they'd let me hear her voice. But once you answer, they never stop. I felt cold sweat down my neck. "What do you want from me?" I shouted. The answer came instantly. "They already have you." The walls began to vibrate. Papers slid off the desk. The light above me burst with a sharp pop, and the air filled with static, like a storm trapped inside the building. In that noise, I could hear dozens of whispers overlapping, fragments of sentences, cries, laughter, all blending into one endless hum. Then, as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The silence was thick enough to hurt my ears. I grabbed the notebook, slammed it shut, and ran outside. The sky was dark, the wind dead. When I reached my truck, I saw movement in the warehouse window. A man's silhouette, standing perfectly still in the same spot I'd been seconds earlier, hand resting on the radio. I didn't go home that night. I parked by the river instead, watching the water move, trying to convince myself that exhaustion was making me see things. But when I turned on the radio in my truck, the same static filled the cabin. Then a familiar voice came through, calm, steady, impossibly close. "You shouldn't have come back, Jack." I turned the radio off. The static didn't stop. It was inside the speakers, inside the air, inside me. That's when I realized Morris Grayson never left the warehouse. And now, neither had I. I stopped pretending I could ignore it. The voices followed me everywhere now. They whispered in the sound of running water, in the soft hum of the refrigerator, even in the silence between my thoughts. Every time I tried to convince myself it was in my head, something happened that proved otherwise. That morning, I found muddy footprints in my hallway. They started at the door but didn't lead outside, they ended right at the foot of my bed. The prints were too big to be mine. The smell of damp earth filled the air, the same scent that clung to the floor of the warehouse. I drove there again that afternoon. I told myself I just needed to see it one more time, to understand what was happening. The sky was gray, low clouds hanging like smoke. Inside, the warehouse felt colder than it should have been. The air had that same heavy quiet, like sound itself was afraid to exist there. I walked to the office. The notebook lay open on the desk, pages fluttering though there was no wind. The radio was off, or at least it looked like it was. I didn't touch it this time. I just stood there, staring at it, waiting. After a moment, a faint clicking sound came from inside the walls. Then came the whisper. "Jack." It wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from all around me, through the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Hundreds of voices overlapping, some crying, some laughing, all of them whispering my name. I ran outside and stood in the open air, gasping, but the voices didn't stop. They carried through the wind, distant and scattered, like echoes bouncing between the clouds. That night, I set up my phone to record. I wanted proof, something real. I placed it near my bed, turned off the lights, and tried to sleep. I didn't. Every few minutes, I heard faint knocks from the walls. Once, I heard what sounded like breathing, slow and steady, just behind the headboard. In the morning, I checked the recording. The first few hours were normal, silence, small creaks of the house. Then, around 3:17 a.m., a whisper. It was clear, unmistakable, right next to the microphone. "Jack, we found you." I dropped the phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I played it again. The same voice, the same sentence, but this time, there were more voices beneath it. Some repeating the same line, others saying things I couldn't make out. I went back to the warehouse the next day with one goal, to find where the voices came from. I searched every wall, every corner, tapping the panels, listening for hollow spaces. When I reached the far end of the building, near the loading area, I heard a sound behind one of the metal sheets, a faint scraping, like nails against steel. I pried the sheet loose and found a small wooden door hidden behind it. Old, rotted, covered in soot. I hesitated, but then pulled it open. Behind it was a narrow stairway leading down into darkness. The air that came from below was colder than anything I'd ever felt. It smelled of rust and earth. With my flashlight shaking in my hand, I went down. The steps creaked under my weight, and something wet dripped from the ceiling. At the bottom, there was a small concrete room. No windows, No doors, just walls covered in strange markings, circles, lines, symbols like those from the Notebook. In the center sat another radio, older and more rusted than the one upstairs. It turned on the second I stepped closer. The static filled the space, so loud it hurt my ears. Then, through the noise, a single voice spoke. Not a whisper this time. A man's voice, the same one I'd heard since the beginning. I told them your name, it said. Now they know you. I backed away, but the radio grew louder, as if the sound itself pushed me toward the wall. Faces began to appear in the concrete, faint outlines pressing from within, mouths moving, eyes opening, whispering all at once. The air felt thick and alive. I stumbled up the stairs, gasping, and burst into the daylight. The door slammed shut behind me with a force that shook the floor. For a moment, everything was silent again. Then, from somewhere deep inside the warehouse, I heard it, my own voice. Jack. When I got home, I smashed my phone, my radio, even my television. I thought cutting off the noise would stop them. But the whispers didn't need devices anymore. They were in my head, echoing softly whenever I tried to think. That evening, someone called me from a number I didn't recognize. I answered without speaking. There was no one on the line, only static. Then the same deep voice, calm and slow. You shouldn't have gone below. I hung up, but my phone buzzed again, and again. When I finally turned it off, the sound continued from the walls, faint, rhythmic, like breathing. Now, every time I close my eyes, I hear them calling my name from somewhere just beyond the edge of hearing. They know me. And I don't think they ever stop once they learn who you are. By the fifth night, I hadn't eaten or slept properly in days. My eyes burned, my hands shook constantly, and every time I blinked, I saw faint outlines of faces in the corners of the room, just impressions, like smoke trapped behind glass. The voices had become constant now, rising and falling in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I knew I couldn't keep living like that. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Every sound became them, the hiss of pipes, the rustle of leaves outside, even the faint hum of electricity in the walls. It all spoke my name. That morning, I made a decision. I would go back to the warehouse one last time. I would end it, burn the place down, destroy whatever was inside. I didn't know if it would stop the voices, but I had to try. I filled 2 canisters with gasoline and loaded them into the truck. The drive there felt longer than ever. The roads were empty, the sky overcast, as if the world itself was holding its breath. When I arrived, the warehouse stood in silence, massive and cold, like a tomb waiting to be sealed. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. The dust, the scattered papers, the cracked mirror. The radio sat quietly on the desk, the red glow on its dial faint but steady, as if it had been waiting for me. I walked through the building, pouring gasoline along the walls, the floor, the stairs that led down to the underground room. The smell filled my lungs, thick and heavy. I hesitated before lighting the first match. My hand trembled, but I forced myself to focus. Then the radio turned on by itself. The static was low at first, almost soothing, but then the voice came, clear, close, and unmistakable. Jack, don't do this. I froze. The voice wasn't Morris Grayson's anymore. It was my own. Jack, it repeated, softer this time, you can't stop them. I stepped closer, staring at the radio. The reflection in the cracked mirror beside it wasn't me. It was Grayson, his eyes hollow, his lips barely moving. They're part of you now, he said through the static. They found a new signal. You. I kicked the radio off the desk, smashing it against the floor. The sound didn't stop. The static grew louder, bleeding from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Every surface vibrated. I heard hundreds of voices now, men, women, children, all whispering, crying, laughing, their words tangled into one endless tone. I tried to light the match, but the air itself pulsed like a heartbeat, pressing against my chest. The lighter slipped from my hand. Somewhere above, a light flickered, the same one that had never been connected to power. It flashed in perfect rhythm with the voices. Then, for the first time, I heard one clear sentence cut through the noise. "You can't burn what's already dead." The floor beneath me shuddered. A violent gust of cold air burst from the stairwell, knocking me backward. My flashlight rolled away, spinning its beam across the wall. And for a moment, I saw them, dozens of faces, translucent and pale, staring from inside the concrete. Their mouths opened, and the sound that came out wasn't human. It was like static given life, a scream made of electricity. I ran. I didn't look back. The gasoline fumes burned my throat as I stumbled toward the door. When I reached the exit, I turned and threw the lighter. The flame caught instantly. The fire roared through the building, swallowing the walls in seconds. Outside, I watched as the warehouse burned. The windows glowed orange, smoke twisting upward like dark arms. For the first time in weeks, the voices were silent. I stood there until the roof collapsed, until there was nothing left but fire and the faint hum of metal melting. Then I walked to the truck. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from relief. It was over. Or so I thought. As I started the engine, the radio in my dashboard crackled to life. I hadn't turned it on. Static filled the cabin, soft at first, then louder. My reflection in the rearview mirror began to blur. I reached for the power button, but before I could touch it, the same voice spoke. My voice. "You did what I couldn't, Jack. You freed them." The static grew until it drowned everything else. The windshield vibrated, the lights flickered, and then, silence. 2 days later, the fire department found what was left of the warehouse. The building was completely destroyed. No body was ever recovered. Only the old radio survived, melted but still intact, sitting in the ashes. The police took it as evidence. When one of the officers switched it on, it hummed softly, and through the static, a voice whispered, calm and almost grateful. I bought an abandoned warehouse. It belonged to a man who spoke to spirits, and now I hear them too.